It's a blessing to be able to join you here today. And as we study a little bit about a subject that's been on my mind, the reason is I've been teaching a class on church history. So I've been reviewing some of the times when the devil made very heavy attacks and it looked like he was going to win, but at the last minute, he lost. And so we're going to trace some of those events here this morning. And I've given it the title, Truth Will Always Triumph. When I was young, I enjoyed some of the games that people play, but there was one thing I never liked, and that was to lose. Now, I'm not interested in games anymore. I'm not interested in making somebody else lose. But, it is a special blessing to be on the winning side. And yes, there are sacrifices involved in being willing to be on the winning side. But in the end, you're better off. And you will have many, many blessings. And so God wants us to figure out which is the winning side and join that side. And one of the big issues in the very last bit of time, I believe, we're in it, is over which day does the Bible ask us to worship on. So if you discover what day it is and you choose to keep that one, you will be on the winning side. Of course, if you don't have a heart relationship, you still won't be on the winning side. But those two things together will put you on the winning side. And truth will always triumph. Now, if we measure the triumph by the number of people that follow it, we'll make the wrong choice. There's something built into human thinking that if most people think it's okay, it must be okay. But history proves that most people have always been wrong. So you can't go by who's the majority. You have to go by what God's Word tells you. Now, one of the evidences why truth will always triumph is found in 2 Corinthians 13, verse 8. For we can do nothing against the truth. You can put all your efforts, all your energy in trying to stamp out the truth, and you will not succeed. Instead, what will happen says, but for the truth. So all of people's efforts against the truth will only do one thing. It will establish the truth even stronger than before it was opposed. And so God has the power to overrule any efforts against his truth. And we'll just trace a few from the Bible, and then we're going to look at church history. In Genesis 6, verses 13 and 14, and God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Therefore he gives an instruction, make thee an ark of gopher wood. So the truth for the time of Noah was that it's going to rain. And because it's going to rain very seriously, more than what happened in Florida, that you need to build a boat. And the message was that the people needed to get in the boat. We're also told in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, verse 7, by faith, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, had Noah ever seen that it rained? No. But God said it was going to rain. And there's only one way that he could believe that, and it was by faith. Noah chose to believe by faith that when God said it would rain, it's going to rain. So he moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. So the message of truth that Noah gave divided the entire world into two groups of people. Here's a little explanation of some of the details. While Noah was giving his warning message to the world, his works testified of his sincerity. So he was building the boat, and he was preaching, and the fact that he was building the boat showed everybody that he believed what he was preaching. All that he possessed, he invested in the ark. Now, he was probably quite rich before he built the ark, but he used up all of his money, all of his valuables in building this ark because he believed that what God said was going to happen. As he began to construct that immense boat on dry ground, multitudes came from every direction to see the strange sight and to hear the earnest, fervent words of the singular preacher. So the word started going out. There's this crazy man over here that's building this boat, and it's never rained, and he claims it's going to rain so much that we need to get in that boat. Talk about advertising. They didn't need social media. This traveled everywhere on the earth. And Noah didn't have to go anywhere to talk to anyone because everybody came out to hear him. Many at first appeared to receive the warning. Overcome by the prevailing unbelief, they finally joined their former associates in rejecting the solemn message. So many of them, when they first heard what Noah said, they were convicted by the power of God. He's telling us the truth. But then as they listened to their friends, they listened to their pastors, they listened to the educated people. We call, educated people by all different titles today. They had them all back then. And those people said, oh, this is not possible. The scientists said there's not a single possibility that it could rain. And so these people, as they listened day after day to all of the criticism, they finally said, you know what? We were foolish to believe that man out there. Also, it says some were deeply convicted and would have heeded the words of warning, but there were so many to jest and ridicule that they partook of the same spirit. So there were different groups. It divided everybody. But as we know from the story, it ended up sliding back to only Noah's family that were willing to get in the ark. Everybody else thought he was a crazy man. And yet, it was the truth for that day. And all of their opposition, when it began to rain, God demonstrated that he was right. But it's sad because it was too late for them. They were pounding on the ark, saying, we believe now, but Noah couldn't let them in. The ark was shut, and they all were destroyed. There's a reason why that story comes very early in the Bible. Because if you start reading at the beginning, you come to grips with that story very quickly. We go next to an experience from Pharaoh as the children of Israel were being led out of Egypt. There are many experiences, but we're going to pick the last one. And they were finally out, and they were on their way, rejoicing that God had delivered them from Egypt. And God led them by a cloud, actually, so they knew exactly where to march. And they came into this place. They didn't stop to think about it ahead of time, but they came to this place where the water of the Red Sea was in front of them, and beside them was a mountain. And here's where we find Exodus 14, verses 19 and 20. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. Now, you might think about the panic that was in the hearts of the Israelites as they started thinking, wow, we got out of Egypt all right, but now we're going to get wiped out. Here's Pharaoh's army, and they're right on our tail, and they're going to wipe us out. And the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. Now here's one of those cases which often happens. At the last minute, God delivers. And so if you are looking to see that you're winning in the beginning, you might join the wrong side. But if you're willing to wait till the ending, then you will be on the right side. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel, and it was a cloud and darkness to them. So the Egyptians were in this darkness that they couldn't get out of, and yet they could still hear, they're over there, all right, but we just can't see anything. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel, and it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, or the Israelites, so that the one came not near the other all night. Now, I don't know how much sleep many of the Israelites got, because I think most of them were scared. But those that really believed that God had gotten them out of Egypt for a purpose, they could sleep well that night, not worrying about what was going to happen the next day. And they'd already seen that God had intervened on their behalf. A comment on that, God in his providence, in what? His providence. So God brought them into that hard spot purposely. God in his providence brought the Hebrews into the mountain fastnesses before the sea, that he might manifest his power in their deliverance. He's been working on trying to help them trust him from the very first time that Moses returned to Egypt. And now he still is trying to help them believe that if you will listen to me, if you will follow me, don't look at how many people are ignoring it. Don't look at the opposition you have. It doesn't matter, because what I tell you is going to be the winning side in the end. Now we go down to one from the life of Jesus. And Jesus, as you know, while he was born in Bethlehem, he lived and he grew up in Nazareth, the city that was said can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Well, we're going to see how bad Nazareth is, especially the religious people. In Luke 4:28-30, it says, "And all they in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath." Now, Jesus was simply reading the Bible and explaining what it meant. And when he explained what it meant, they got angry and rose up and thrust him out of the city and led him unto the brow of the hill whereon their city was built, that they might cast him down headlong. They were going to kill him. You know, we don't let people tell us those kind of things. And so they were going to push him off of the cliff and get rid of him. But instead of that, the Bible says, but he, passing through the midst of them, went his way. He disappeared. They couldn't see him. He left. Amazing. Now, one thing we need to point out, that Jesus could never deliver himself, because we can't deliver ourselves. So his Father was involved in this, in delivering him from the situation. And here's an interesting comment on this. They were filled with madness because they thought Jesus reflected upon them for their lack of piety and loyalty to God, setting before them their spiritual apostasy. There's no group of people that get madder than so-called Christians when their apostasy is pointed out. And so when Jesus read the text that pointed out their apostasy, they really got mad about it. Jesus didn't do that to get them mad. He did that to save them. He did that to open their eyes. But they got mad. But his mission was not ended. Heavenly angels guarded him and held the eyes of the infuriated priests and elders of Israel, so that Jesus passed through the midst unharmed to prosecute his work in cities more favorable to the reception of light and truth. So did their opposition stop the truth? No, it spread it wider. It went more places, because when it's closed in one place, it drives people to other places. And so the truth triumphs in many other places. Now, I don't know whether you noticed, but one of the greatest men of faith has passed away recently. He was known by the name of Brother Andrew. And he had an incredible way of smuggling Bibles into communist countries. You know, a lot of Adventists and other Christians, they get a van and they build a secret compartment in it. And they put the Bibles in that secret compartment and try to smuggle them into communist countries. That's what used to be. But not Brother Andrew. He put the Bibles either on the front seat of his car or on the back seat of his car. And as he drove up to the border, he said a prayer. He said, "Make seeing eyes blind." And it worked every time. The guards looked in his car and they waved him through. Sometimes they didn't even look, they just waved him through. He was an incredible man of faith, and that's what we need to be, I believe, as we near the end. We don't need to worry about the anger and the hatred and all the rest that gets expressed because the truth is presented, but God is going to favor the truth. He's going to bring success to the truth. Now let's switch to the Waldenses. We don't realize how much we owe to the Waldenses. And by the way, for many, many years, they were Sabbath keepers. Not Sunday keepers, they were Sabbath keepers. But their greatest accomplishment was protecting the Bible so that we still have it. Behind the lofty bulwarks of the mountains, in all ages, the refuge of the persecuted and oppressed, the Waldenses found a hiding place. Here, the light of truth was kept burning amid the darkness of the Middle Ages. So it's not the first time God's people have had to flee to the mountains due to the hatred of the message that they were bringing. Here, for 1,000 years, witnesses for the truth maintained the ancient faith. When it says ancient faith, it's talking about the church that Jesus started and what he taught and what the disciples taught. And they were preserving that wonderful truth that Jesus had brought, which the leaders of the church in Nazareth hated, but it was still the truth, whether they hated it or not. Whoops, went too far. Notwithstanding the crusades against them, so the papal church was so determined to wipe them out that they would get large armies of people to go and try to wipe out the crusades. And if you ever want wipe out the Waldenses, if you ever want some interesting reading, you want to read about how those attacks turned out. And most of the time, the big army lost and the little army won. Notwithstanding the crusades against them and the inhuman butchery to which they were subjected, they continued to send out their missionaries to scatter the precious truth. Now, the Waldenses could have said, well, we're hidden pretty well here. We can defend ourselves very well here. And so let's just stay here and not try to help people understand the truth. But they didn't do that. And they went into danger, trusting God that he could protect them as they gave the truth to the world. They continued to send out their missionaries to scatter the precious truth. They were hunted to death, yet their blood watered the seed sown, and it failed not of yielding fruit. Why? Because truth always wins. If religious hatred kills somebody, all it does is spreads the knowledge of the truth. In fact, there was one person in the book I read, and he was in front of those religious leaders that were planning to, burn him at the stake. And he told them, he said, you're wasting your time. This is my own words. You're wasting your time because the blood of martyrs is like seed. It just spreads the truth. You would think the devil would give up. And that's the reason the devil does stop persecution after a while, because he sees that it's helping the truth, and he decides to do it a different way, which is more effective. But, he has to work through human beings, and so people get stirred up and angry, and they try it for a while, but it doesn't work. I read a book about China. It was exactly the same. And that book was written about all kinds of missionaries, Protestant missionaries, Catholic missionaries, Seventh-day Adventist missionaries. And they, of course, were being killed in many situations. Horrible things were done to them. But it finally got to where the Chinese couldn't stomach doing it anymore. And they stopped it. Well, they've started it up again, but, God is able to win. A little more on the Waldenses. The persecutions visited for many centuries upon this God-fearing people were endured by them with a patience and constancy that honored their Redeemer. How could they do that? Because they said, our life is in your hands, Lord. And so we're trusting in you. If you let our life be taken, that's okay. But if you don't, we know you can preserve us. Notwithstanding the crusades against them and the inhuman butchery to which they were subjected, they continued to send out their missionaries to scatter the precious truth. They were hunted to the death, yet their blood watered the seed sown, and it failed not of yielding fruit. Thus, the Waldenses witnessed for God centuries before the birth of Luther. Scattered over many lands, they planted the seeds of the Reformation that began in the time of Wycliffe. So we look to the beginning of the Reformation in the time of Wycliffe, but we don't always recognize that it wouldn't have been able to get started if it hadn't been for the faithfulness of the Waldenses in centuries of time. The longest time of any group of people to do that. And because of the missionaries that they sent out, trusting that God would turn the tide someday, and he did. Well, what was beginning in Wycliffe's time grew broad and deep in the days of Luther. When you read about the life of Luther, and the truth that he taught was totally unstoppable. It was too late for the papal church to stop the Reformation. They tried their best, but they lost. And then, of course, after that, things got freer again, even than what it was at that time. But now we have a part, and is to be carried forward to the close of time. The Reformation has never been finished. There were truths that they did not grasp during what we usually call the Reformation. But there was to be a continuation of that Reformation. When the Reformation is finished, Jesus will return. So we have our marching orders, and if we really believe that God can win, regardless of what happens to us, then we don't worry about what we have to do. Now here's the most important thing that we owe to the Waldenses. By patient, untiring labor, sometimes in the deep, dark caverns of the earth, by the light of torches, the sacred scriptures were written out, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. Why? Because the papal church did not want to have to argue with Bible-believing people. They always lost the argument. In fact, one supposedly great speaker was asked the question and told, "You need to prove them wrong by the Bible." And Dr. X said, "I can't do it by the Bible. I will do it by church tradition." Well, they tried that on Luther, and Luther proved them wrong by church tradition. And so really, there is no defense of error. It says that angels from heaven surrounded these faithful workers, helping them to keep the Bible available for the day when printing would come and when the Bible could be spread like the leaves of autumn. Satan had urged on the papal priests and prelates to bury the word of truth beneath the rubbish of error. Now that's a type of battle that's harder to fight. It wouldn't be if we all knew our Bibles better, but if we're not really good Bible students, then when truth is battled by error, we swallow some of it. So they tried to bury the word of truth beneath the rubbish of error, hearsay, and superstition. But in a most wonderful manner, it was preserved uncorrupted through all the ages of darkness. So in all the effort to get rid of the Bible, they lost the battle, and God won the battle, and the Bible is available more than it ever has been. Something from John Wycliffe's life. He was hated because he spoke unsparingly about the truth of the Bible and the abuses of the church. And so, of course, in his whole life, they were trying to get him. And I'm just going to read one from the very end of his life. A third time he was brought to trial, and now before the highest ecclesiastical tribunal in the kingdom. As arrows from the Lord's quiver, the reformers' words pierced their hearts. The charge of heresy which they had brought against him, he with convincing power threw back upon themselves. Why, he demanded, did they dare to spread their errors for the sake of gain, to make merchandise of the grace of God? With whom, think you, he finally said, are you contending? With an old man on the brink of the grave? No, with truth. Truth which is stronger than you and will overcome you. So saying, he withdrew from the assembly, and not one of his adversaries attempted to prevent him. God's power was so strong as he gave that speech that they were scared to do anything. They planned to get him one way or another and kill him, but they were paralyzed, and he walked out of there a free man. Wycliffe fully expected that his life would be the price of his fidelity, but God's providence still shielded his servant. In his church at Lutterworth, he was about to dispense the communion. He fell stricken with palsy, and in a short time yielded up his life. So they wanted to kill him from the time he started preaching about these things until they were not able to get him. He died a natural death. Made them so mad that they dug up later his ashes and his body, and they burned it and sprinkled the ashes on the river. But we're told that all that did was spread the light throughout the world. Now that their leader was removed, the preachers labored with even greater zeal than before, and multitudes flocked to listen to their teachings. Some of the nobility and even the wife of the king were among the converts. So here's another way that God blessed. They were happy to get rid of Wycliffe, they thought, but instead the truth went faster and more people were giving the truth in more places until it practically took over England. It was about half of the people had accepted what was taught by Wycliffe. We'll make this the last one. This took place in Bohemia, which we know as Czech Republic, although Bohemia was bigger than Czech Republic. Two strangers from England, when they came to Bohemia, it says, beginning with an open attack on the Pope's supremacy, they were soon silenced by the authorities. That was probably not a wise choice, but the Lord gave them wisdom. In a place open to the public, they drew two pictures. One represented the entrance of Christ into Jerusalem, meek and sitting upon an ass, and followed by his disciples in travel-worn garments and with naked feet. The other picture portrayed a pontifical procession, the Pope arrayed in his rich robes and triple crown, mounted upon a horse magnificently adorned, preceded by trumpeters and followed by cardinals and prelates in dazzling array. Here was a sermon which arrested the attention of all classes. Crowds came to gaze upon the drawings. And this wasn't the only factor, but as a result of this, and plus what Huss and Jerome did, it essentially turned the entire country Protestant. Well, there were wars waged against them, but they lost. The huge armies. And when they got in close connection to the Bohemian army, they just panicked and lost the battle, and the Bohemians got all kinds of booty out of that. And so it was an incredible thing. But you know, then the emissaries brought some compromise suggestions, and that turned the tide, unfortunately, for a time until Luther came along. Well, these are just a few. There's all through history, there have been time after time after time that those who were unpopular but would stick with truth are vindicated when God sees it's time to vindicate them and shows that he is with them. He is behind them. We're going to have our turn. I think we realize, most of us, that our turn is coming. As we watch the events of earth, our turn is coming. And so may we be as faithful. And one of the things I believe that helps us to be faithful is to realize that God never loses. It may look like he's going to lose, but he won't. Don't worry about that period of time when it looks like he's going to lose. Just stick with it until he wins, because he will always win.